I actually wanted to hear like how many of you guys, just by show of hands, is listening to podcasts more than once a week.
I literally listen to them every day.
Listen to podcasts, but definitely not once
Yeah,
a
not
week.
once a week. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyone of you guys that is running your own podcast or no?
I'd like
Yes.
You like to? You're dreaming about running your own podcast. Yeah, that's good.
Running my podcast. Oh yeah, I'd love to.
Our series.
Yes. Yeah.
Good. What about like, are you then planning to launch one, or are you just dreaming about it?
Dreaming at the moment.
Dreams.
Definitely dream.
Good.
Yeah.
See if we can make them to reality today. And anyone, what is your favorite show? Do you have a favorite podcast show?
I love The Diary of a CEO.
RSCO, yeah, very well known with Stephen Bartlett.
Love
yeah.
him.
My favourite one used to be the Joe Budden podcast.
Yeah.
Just like a hip hop. Yeah.
Yeah.
Love
Really,
that.
really.
Nice.
That they disbanded, so that's not.
Yeah, that's a very good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that as well.
Yeah.
Good. So you know what podcast is, but there's always, to my story, I think I found out with podcasts, there's always a story about why it happens. So back in 2017, I was in London, in Soho, and I was meeting my good friend Ali, and Ali is also like me from the hospitality industry, and we worked for years, and he's just got a new job, and we still meet every quarter to talk about life, leadership, and hospitality. And we were sitting and talking, and I was giving him like some of my insights and learnings, because that time Hospitality Maverick was a consultancy business, and I was of course trying to meet as many CEO founders to get the consultancy gig. And they shared all their pains and insights and learnings. And he said, "Oh, this is super interesting. I would love to be a fly on the wall when you have these conversations." And that moment, that conversation made me wonder, how can I actually do that? So I thought, like, okay, I started trying to write blogs. But because that's not my super skill, I'm not a specifically good writer, I think. I thought, okay, I need to find a different way. And then I went on for a couple of months, and then I had another coffee with another friend here in Brighton. It's called Chris. And Chris is a marketing genius, and he said, "It's very obvious what you need to do, Michael. You need to go and listen to the Tim Ferriss podcast show." And actually, at that point, I was not really into podcasts. It was not a thing I did, and I knew the 4-hour work week, and I thought, yeah, let's listen to that. And then I, of course, listened to Tim Ferriss. I got quite gripped. That's one of my favorite shows. And then I thought, that's it. That is the way I actually can help share these learnings from all these great people to make, leaders better, Ali better, other leaders better, and also by the end, the industry, which in principle really into my passion. And that then grew to launching, the podcast, and 240 plus episodes later. We have been award-winning in the global hospitality scene. We're seen as one of the top 30 hospitality podcasts now. We are one of the biggest social media influencers in hospitality as well, and got awards for that and a number of other things. We do speaking engagement on back of that, and we have been writing white papers, been asked to write white papers as thought leaders. And then, in principle, I found out I've probably become like what is called like a key person of influence within the industry without really thinking about it. If we use some marketing terms, which is very powerful. But besides, it gives you, contacts and opportunities. Also learned in other projects I'm involved in, actually, it gives investment into them. Investor looks really positive about that I'm running this podcast, and I have this network, because the podcast for me became a way of leveraging my relationships and actually building a stronger network. So, and then numbers are always important. Those probably marketing people say, what is the numbers? What are we talking about? So Hospitality Mavericks podcast show is a niche podcast, which is a global podcast, 172 countries listening in every month, about 5,000 people. But what I find is really interesting about the traction here is that we talked a bit about before we started, there's something called unique listeners. And these people listen into the show more than twice a month. So it's a bit like you have your Stephen Bartlett.
Me and my addiction.
Yeah. and they are the super fans. They're the raving fans, and they are the one we are trying to really connect with. And I thought as we built that audience, which didn't come in one day, it's in 2018. We also got the podcast commercialized, so now it's sponsored. We have a great sponsor partner we had for more than 18 months, called BizSimply, which is a tech platform that sells the product into hospitality industry. So that's like the journey, and behind that, of course, then people think out there. You said, "Who are you actually, Michael?" I'm actually, born and raised into this industry. My mom and dad ran hospitality businesses in the southern part of Denmark down to the German border. So it was in with the, I was born into the restaurant, in principle, in the crib, being there together with my mom. And then when I was 50, my mom sent me to McDonald's because I didn't know at that point, but she has some problems with the back, so she was downsizing her business, and I had this little sausage trailer where I was selling sausage out every weekend and earning money for my stereo. So I was not really happy to be sent to McDonald's, not because actually in the 90s I didn't really know what McDonald's was. I'd maybe been one in Paris once time, having a Big Mac, that was it. But I got a job, started cleaning the loos, became a manager, and eventually, and that spent more than 11 years with McDonald's and different kind of jobs, both in the head office in Denmark, also in the UK in the end. And then I also spent time with a Danish cafe chain at that point, was really driving organic coffee here for people in the UK. If you know the Boston Tea Party, very similar kind of thing. And we took that from about 5 units to 27 units and 120 people to 600 people, and I was responsible for operation and people there. And then I became a consultant, and I worked with a number of different businesses across the UK, and that's actually where the podcast was connected. And then also, as you mentioned, part of something called the Pulse Kitchen was eventually actually a catering business, delivering food into companies like Airbnb, Citizen M hotels in London. So we delivered hospitality service on site, in principle, with great plant-based food, where meat was an additional add-on. And then today, part of the Pulse Kitchen is as well, where we are trying to create these irresistible meal solutions created on your favorite meals. So you bolognese, chili bean, tikka masala, all based on pulses. Nature's most healthiest and most sustainable protein.
Amazing.
Yeah. So that was the story wrapped up as quick as I could.
So you've definitely been in hospitality since you were in the tummy, it sounds like.
Yeah.
But one thing I'm fascinated by is you mentioned growing from kind of this concept and idea to 5,000 listeners, and was it 1,000 of those avid super fans, which is amazing. How does somebody go from a concept to that, and how long is that time frame?
As an hour example, and if you want to do it yourself, I think you definitely need to say, if you want to get to here, with like looking back now in the rear mirror, I would say it's probably taking us 3 years to get to that point.
Amazing.
And actually this year we really see the acceleration of things, both on opportunities like I'm here today, but other things as well, like where you get involved in things that wouldn't come under your radar if you hadn't done the work. You need to do the work. And the work, actually, the secret to this is, and I talked with Charlie about it before we started as well, like, is consistency. It's a flywheel effect. It's like the 1% every day. You do 1% every day or become 1% better every day, then you're 37 times better the year after. And I think that's been the key thing and the key theme that has gone through the podcast. And then I think also it's about to want to do it. That's another thing. Do you really want to continue doing it? I think it really has to be connected to your, especially as the host, to your personal why and what really you're passionate about. And I think you need to be really clear about how that why then translate into your podcasts. Why? And an element of that. So my why is that I want to become the best version of myself, and in doing that, I hope I can make the hospitality industry and beyond better for people, society, and the planet. And at the same time, the business, of course, we're involved in has to make a profit, and that translates then into the podcast, which then is that how do we actually make sure we share what great Maverick leaders know and do to build businesses that is able to make the world a better place, a business as a force for good. And that's been like, it's a part of me and it's translated into the podcast. And therefore it's very easy as well to direct it in different ways and actually have different guests on. So I don't only have hospitality guests on, I will also have people from the outside. But I think the key thing here is like the 1% and build it on your why. That's the key two things to get to there.
And do you deliver, so with your podcast, when you first set out to do it, was it always, we need to release one a week and we need to commit to that? Or did you look at like kind of what was going on in the industry? How do people like even approach the first few steps of a podcast?
Yeah, there is the do and don't, as we call it today. And we'll share a presentation later. We thought it would be better to share a presentation than it became too presentation heavy. So I have some things I put in for people who can get some value out there, but I'll talk a bit about some of them. So I think lots of people, in general, I think we as founders and CEOs, we say we strategize, but we often forget to stay there long enough to really think the concept through. And I wouldn't say I did this. So this is not, I just learned I should have spent more time there. So I actually retrofitted it. And I think also we're quite lucky because podcast hadn't really taken off at that point. But now if you go into podcasting, competition is highly, highly big out there, even across sectors. But even in mine, there was 2 podcasts in the UK talking about restaurants and hospitality when I started.
Wow, that's amazing.
And now there's 10. And
so it's not that many actually.
No, but in the UK and then globally, it's gone from being a handful to now being more than 100, and the pandemic really accelerated that.
Yeah.
And we're all fighting for the same audience. And how do you actually then, build that rapport with them? And then you do that by understanding their pain. And so it's all about this, really spending time on researching, competition, your audience, you will like that, understanding your avatar, understanding their pain point, what is their need, who I'm speaking to, how should I speak to them, what problems should I solve for them, I would say. And then there comes the next thing you're talking about, like what type of show. That really is really clear from when you understand your why, your audience, because really clear about. So we started delivering it on a random basis. We recorded the first 10, and I actually thought that would be it, these 10. And then, we don't do any more. We don't need to do any more. People don't want it anymore. And actually those 10 was like the MVP. And it showed very quickly people want more on that. And people said, can I come on as well? I thought, okay, that's really interesting.
Right.
And then it became bi-weekly. And that's what we did all the way to the pandemic. And the pandemic, like anyone else, what the hell? What should I do? Well, I need to help the industry. The only way I can help the industry is to get people on the show talking about how we are tackling that. And then it became weekly. And since then, it's been weekly. And that's also where the transformation has been. There's also people who do it twice a week. There's people who do every day. But again, there's some time commitment and quality you need to think about as well. But I really think about it's all about what you want to achieve as a business, and you need to ask yourself all these questions before you start.
Because I think obviously for a lot of people, myself included, being a business owner, when I think of podcasts, socials, communications, marketing in general, there's so many things you can do.
Yeah.
Would you say that it's an easy string to have in your bow, or would you say if you are going to do it, you really need to commit to it and maybe just do it, or can you kind of do it a bit more haphazardly and ad hoc, or do you think really you need to? You mentioned strategizing and really having a focus on it. Do you think maybe people, if they're going to go down the podcast route, they should be like, this is what my direction is for 2023, for example?
It's a really good question, but I think first of all, strategy doesn't mean that you need to sit and create a lot of presentations. Like I want to underline that, but actually start writing down something you're thinking, actually share it with some people as well, and maybe find somebody that's done it themselves so you can get the right question, or buy a book. There's lots of great books around podcasting now on Amazon. So I think the thing around it is actually it's not deciding this is going to be a year. I think you need to create, like anything great, you need to make an MVP, and you need to learn and fail and do quickly. So I think our MVP was 10 episodes. And I've seen actually some companies that's launched now, and some we have worked with, they launch seasons. And let's do 6 and see what happens. And we call it season 1. So it's all about how you wrap it in. But then you get data and you can validate if it really works. But I think I say to people, 1 season is something. Actually, you need to do 2 seasons, and then you can after that just change the rhythm of it. You don't need to commit to every week or bi-weekly. You need also to make it in the speed so you can learn and actually deliver a quality product. Because I think you make 6 great episodes instead of 6 average episodes. I think you'll be in a much better place. You can much better measure it. But if you really commit and want to do it, you're absolutely right. Then you have to make, if you're a small business like we are not that at the Mavericks, you have to say that's the thing we do. And for us, that's been very fruitful. But it's taken a very long time, and because I just thought, okay, these conversation, the feedback I'm getting from the audience, I know this is the right thing. At some point, we will get to that point where the investment is the return of investment is triple, and that's probably 10x now.
Amazing.
Compared to time and costs as well. Yeah.
I think that's amazing, and I'm congratulations. Like I say, really, that is really impressive. One thing I would say, because you've made it seem, I would say from my side of things, a little bit more manageable. Would the audience agree with me? A bit less scary. But one thing that I am kind of self-confessed, and Silicon Brighton will hang their heads, is I'm a bit of a technophobe. So from a kind of equipment side of things, can I just throw my average old Android up, or Apple should probably do both, or what sort of levels of equipment do people need to even start considering or entering into the idea of having a podcast?
I think there's also, online, if you want I want to learn the ropes, there's lots of great, how to get started with podcasts where people sell these online courses for £150. So let's go and do that. And then within that, you will learn some of the things we talked about, but also the technical bit. But I think the technical bit is really, because podcasting is all about, sound quality. Because people are listening to the podcast on the go. So you want to make sure you get that right. And that's what lots of people are nervous about. But actually, today's quality of, laptops and Apple with some great mics, and there's lots of programs, and lots of these podcasts now doesn't really happen in like we're doing now in real life, unfortunately. That was how I did before the pandemic. I was traveling around the country interviewing people. Now, everybody can actually manage to get online, and actually there's platforms that's dedicated to do this, like Zencaster or Riverside or Squadcast, actually, where you actually sit in an online studio. It's a bit like a Zoom on rocks, I call it. And the quality of the audio is amazing there, even if people talk into their laptop. But of course, you have to buy some good mics. And I think it's all about buying good mics and know these basic things. There's some basic things you need to do, but if you can be on a Zoom call, can learn to use your iPhone, you can also learn this. It's not hard in a way.
And so you can, in effect, you can get away with not being a tech wizard. And you can still pull something pretty professional off the ground in not too long a time. Or what kind of time frame do you think it takes to get episode 1 off and rolling?
I think you need to think more. What we did, because we talked with we had somebody to give a bit of mentoring. There was no online courses when we did it. So we found a local person called Laura. She helped us getting how to use the equipment and how to plug it into my laptop using GarageBand. So I got all that. And then we actually said we need to plan out 6 to 10 episodes. So we planned out 6 and we got 10 in the end, people on. And actually what you really should be focusing on as the host is making sure preparing for these interviews, and that takes time. And then prepare from, we talked about the strategy and the marketing piece. I think do that piece first, and I will say, and then focusing on getting the right guest on. Your first 10 guests, good beginning and a good end. This is very important. So your first 10 guests, choose somebody you know as well, because you can have a much better conversation. You probably know somebody who would be a great guest on your podcast. Doesn't have to be a big name. Lots of people think good podcast guests are big names. Actually, some of the best downloads I have for people that, I thought I had so many great conversation with them. But then when they come on the show, like Ali, I mentioned in the beginning, he's been on the show 2 or 3 times, and he's one of the most downloaded ones. And because we have such a good relationship, so the conversation go that naturally deep. Coming back to your question about how long, I would say to do it right, especially in this competitive market. If I had to do it again today, and we just talked about doing a podcast in the Pulse Kitchen, and there was a bit of conversation where people said we can do it in 4 weeks. In technically in a project plan, you can do that. But I think it takes 2 to 3 months to get it right. But again, really to understand the avatar, the format, and how you want to do it, and then the design around the platform. You need to do a couple of assets and so on, but all manageable. But I think if you put that in, and then you can do it quicker, that's good. But it depends on what else you're going on, because this is not the only thing I'm doing. So therefore, I think most businesses that launch podcasts, that will be an add-on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting point, actually, just going back a little bit and talking about the guest speakers. How do you, with the market being much bigger now and there is a lot more competition, how do you nail getting those speakers? And what, how did you pick your 10? How did you just go, these are the guys and this is who we're going to go with?
So we'll start with the last thing you asked about, and then we can talk about double question. Yeah. So the last was really interesting, because actually what I was sitting and thinking a lot about some names, big names in the industry, but I didn't really have a relationship with them. Then I actually went back and said, who do I know that is Mavericks, and they know and they practice these things and everything. They build great businesses, take care of people, society, and the planet, and makes a profit. And that was actually how I decided to find them. And actually, I already had some kind of relationship with them, or was have definitely somebody new to get an intro to them. And then I actually just sent them the format of what I want to do and the vision for every conversation. So every time I interview somebody, and that comes to answer a bit the other question, I sent them a vision for what the conversation about. Don't send the question, I send the vision for what I would like to get out of and what the audience could learn from it. And that was actually the starting point. And then what I do now is actually, I either use guests that's been on, ask them. If I can have an idea that, so-and-so, could you ask them? So if they had a great experience, they will probably have no problem asking that person to come on my show. And then there's also PR media agencies now that reaches out and says, do you want this founder on the show? But they don't come on the show because it's the right name. We always do a pre-interview because I want to know them more. I want to know about the speed they talk in, what they think is interesting, what they really want to get across. So that becomes about them and the audience more than it becomes about what I want to ask them about.
And with because you mentioned you've got your 1,000 super fans, which I love, and I think that's incredible. Do you get feedback from them? Does it work where you get kind of testimonial? How do you get your feedback from your fans?
So they can leave reviews, and I always ask that on the podcast. Always has to be an ask, isn't that what you say in marketing? And then I spend quite a lot of time asking them on some of the social media when I want to make a change, but we don't do lots of change. We find out what works, and we keep the 1%. So recently we asked about 4 initiatives we want to do this year. We normally do 2 new things every year. So last time was new website, and it was a new way of taking in guests. It was very internal. This year it's more about what can we do, and we asked them, we want a WhatsApp group for the community. Do you want video? Do you want events / supper clubs? And what was the last thing? Do you want more written content or transcripts from the show? And actually they wanted video. So that's, of course, we're working out. So you do it with
Everyone loves a video.
So that's one of the things we're working on. So that's one way. And then actually, what I try to do every year is block some time out where I invite these people, because many of the people that is the 1,000 fans will translate into your newsletter. They will follow you on the newsletter as well. We do a weekly newsletter as well, where we send out information about the episode, but also a weekly quote I like that inspired me. And then we also, in there, we will have other things, I might listen to a podcast, or I'm going speaking somewhere, or I'm going to this trade show, or there's this article I read. So a bit like random things we find that can help fueling the why of what Mavericks know and do to build great businesses. So we asked them in there for setting up a call with me, and I have these 10 to 15 minutes call with the listeners, which always make me aware about where they are in their life cycles, because I have run hospitality businesses, but I'm not in the front line running it in this environment. So it's really
and it's
great.
Changed a lot, particularly since COVID.
Exactly. So one of the super fans is called Drew. I thought he calls me regularly. I said, Michael, that was a great interview. He also sometimes said, that could have been done better, Michael. That was our audio quality was not okay there. So you had these watchdogs of the...
Was it Drew?
Yeah.
We're giving a shout out to Drew, the big super fan.
But yeah, so there's different ways I do it in a way, but the
Nice.
most powerful way is getting one-to-one time with these fans.
And I would say, I don't know if the rest of the audience got this, but it sounds there like actually the podcast can be almost an incubator for other elements, more content, other ways of connecting with your audience, and a great way to get your why out there.
Yeah.
Across the board.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think one thing we have talked about and touched on is numbers.
Yeah.
And so with there being more demand,
Yeah.
how important are those numbers? And I'm sure for many people starting off, a bit like, you know, when you start your socials and you've got 3 followers, you feel a bit depressed and disheartened. So what advice can you give people on how they can get those numbers up and how much should they really value those numbers? Where should they be thinking?
It was me. I looked also too much on those numbers in the
Okay.
other day. So you have your dashboard, and today the analytics are even better. It tells you absolutely if your launch of an episode is a flop or not.
Oh, brilliant. So not for the faint-hearted. Good
So
to know.
I think with me, I wouldn't even look at that and actually just focusing
Okay.
on what you put in. So again, make sure that the guest gets a great experience, that they will shout about it and share it, because that's the biggest leverager in my view.
Okay.
And then, of course, there's all the technical bit. You need to be available on all the platforms, Spotify, Apple, blah, 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 blah. But most platforms that distribute your episodes today, I use something called Captivate, which really good just to connect you automatically to all the platforms you need to be on.
Oh, great. So
That
that
helps with all
does
the
it for
technical,
you.
all the distribution.
great.
And then, of course, you need to upload it yourself to YouTube. It doesn't do YouTube and SoundCloud. But again, it depends on how important. But you are on the 20% that gives 80%.
Yeah.
So that helps, and that takes you out globally to India and so on. So actually, when I actually moved my podcast from another platform to that, actually that boosted my numbers extremely much, because suddenly I was hitting globally.
No, that
And
makes
not
sense.
just a UK-based thing that was shared by my own network and my social media efforts. So I think, again, you have to have faith in it will happen if you are delivering value both to the guests, give them a great experience. The most important is the audience. You have to give to the audience. You have to go in with the giver's mindset when you do this. It's not about you, and you will reap the fruit in some part of the journey, but it's really about, having the giver's mindset and see the long-term effect. It's a bit like being a farmer. You have to plant the seeds to see the harvest looking good, and you can reap
and then
the
we'll
fruit.
get it to your restaurants and to Pulse.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think it's interesting, actually, because when I think about podcasts, it is about, I'm not really thinking about who I'm the owner of the show. I'm thinking about what information they're delivering and what value I can get. So I suppose if we constantly rethink about it in that kind of sense, and the why, and delivering to the audience something of value, then it should in effect deliver.
Yeah.
Great, amazing. So one other thing, obviously going back a little bit, I suppose, to the technical side of things, what I'm thinking is, in my head, I've got a wonderful person in front of me. I've got my iPhone on recording, or my Android phone, no product placement here, recording, editing.
Yeah.
So how free-flowing are the conversations? I know podcasts tend to vary. The ones I listen to are anything from 45 minutes to an hour and a half.
Yeah.
One was 2 hours, a bit much. How much editing do you do? How essential is editing? How much time does that take?
So if you decide when you launch to do it yourself, there's a learning curve there.
Okay.
But you can learn that online today. But I decided from the day outset, because I was already working on other projects, I had clients that had consultancy on. I didn't have the time, so I had to buy it.
Right.
And I didn't want to put one on one of the other employees in the business at that time, because it just wasted time, because that's not, you have to always think about what is a £15 job and a £50 job as a business owner. So I actually outsourced it from day one, but that was also because I wanted the quality of the audio.
Okay.
And I was really willing to pay a premium for that. And you can get podcast editing on Upwork or Fiverr, for peanuts today, because there's lots of them. But there's lots of great platforms where you can do it yourself, like Descript. That's really great. Really, lots of AI really helping with that.
Yes.
So of course, you need to know something, but you can, if you read about it as the business owner or the responsible person for the podcast, then you understand what's going on and you can ask all the right questions. But I really think you should outsource it. That's my view. And some people also say you need to do it yourself to understand it. I did it together with the person that helps us launch it. So I saw how it went. So I understand what the process is. It's taking all the and how. And I'm very focusing on delivering the lengthwise. Does take a lot. In principle, if you prepare well and you know your guests, there will not be lots of editing because it will just be like a conversation we are having here now. Then you can ask if that's a good, bad conversation. That's all about our ability to connect and my ability to answer the question. But in most cases, actually, there's not a lot of editing. There can be technical issue when you're online. But again, there's not much, there's maybe many and errors because that's just totally natural. For human beings, we do that. And it can be the guest stumbling. And then, if you don't do it live, you can then say, well, let's do that question again. Because you also want the guest to feel they don't put something out that doesn't make them look good. And so your job as a host is to make them look good. So I would say outsource the editing. Don't think about it, but it's a cost implication. I know. If not, it's like anything else. You can learn that. It's not rocket science.
And I'm guessing Silicon Brighton would be a wonderful hub to find people who do editing and things like that. Lovely. Charlie's waving at me. The fantastic AV Wiz who's behind today.
Yeah, AV Wiz and podcast editor. So literally, get in touch with Silicon Brighton because I need more work.
I mean, that's absolutely brilliant. Didn't even mean to do that on purpose. So you mentioned there it comes at a cost, which is absolutely true. So how do you then therefore monetize your podcast?
Yeah, I think there's different strategies for that. My strategy has been looking for when I got to the point I thought now it's time, the numbers are there. I was looking for a brand partner. In principle, or a number of brand partners. So I was not looking at putting ads. You can also go out. There's like lots of platforms where there's ads available from everything from toothpaste to books to thought leaders that wants to just plug something in. But I still had to go back to the why, and that was making industry and the leaders better. And I found there was a tech product called Bit Simply that really resonated with me. And then I worked on some projects with other people as like bonus episodes or white papers, Vita Mojo, a bit of shout out there. And then Sideways as well, which is a learning platform and knowledge sharing platform, again, sponsors the weekly newsletter. But they're partners more than they are one-off advertising things. You can do that as well because they do affiliated marketing. We tried to do a bit about that, but you really need to push that yourself. And you can do product placement if you become like Stephen Bartlett or Ryan Holiday from the Daily Stoic podcast. Like there's lots of product placement, but that's not where we are. So there's many ways you can do that. You could also just present it yourself if your company like Buffer have their own podcast. It's presented by Buffer.
Nice, yeah.
There's a different way to get their message out about how they want to be as a company. It's one of my favorite podcasts as well. So I think there's different ways of commercializing, but the things I feel where you really get value and long-term commercialization is the partnership model.
Okay. And so if somebody is considering setting up a podcast from kind of that first 1 to 2 year process where you really start to get to a point where you can maybe find a brand partner, what sort of cost implications do you think somebody might be looking at to set up something in that kind of initial startup costs? Yeah.
So we talk about the CapEx cost of like getting it off the ground. I would say in today's money, cost things are more expensive today, isn't it? So it's £500. Then you have mics.
Fantastic.
You have mics. I guess you have you have a laptop within there. You have mics, and maybe Charlie's gonna shake his head or say, "Yeah, that sounds right." And you have your mics in there. You have, maybe you need some lighting as well. We have some lighting here today as well. So you need some lighting.
Out, Charlie. There you go.
Lighting to when you do your online conversation.
Yeah.
It's good, of course, if you want to use the video. It looks great, and you don't look like you're too pale. Light tips and that as well. So I think that's it in a way. Then you're off to the races in a way.
Do you? And again, this is just a question. Do you pay speakers, or do you hope that you kind of can just get them to come on board because of the why? Is it a mix?
that quite interesting. I never had that question, but I know some people, they actually get paid to get on, and actually some people pays to get on podcasts.
Okay.
So it goes both ways. I don't do any of them because I'm not in service to either the guests or the, I don't want to monetize on somebody comes on the show. I want to take them on the show because I really believe they
Value.
solve the why and also give back to the community or the audience. And that's my approach to it. But it's definitely possible to charge for it that way. And I know there's some podcasts that does that. And there's some guests that become a bit like, wow, I shouldn't have to pay, especially if you come from, let's say, tech companies. Now we're in the tech world today. The tech companies want you to pay for be on the show. But
Interesting.
But they don't have to if they really have some value to deliver. Because we're not talking about their product. We're talking about what they've learned, building the product,
Yeah,
and the
of
problem they
course.
solved.
I think this is amazing. I mean, I don't know about anyone else, but for me, I feel like this has become a way more achievable aspiration than it ever was before. So massive thank you for giving me a bit more kind of get up and go for it. I think I could definitely recommend it to myself and clients.
Yeah.
Do we have some questions from the audience?
Yeah, let's do that.
Absolutely.
Go for it, Jeremy.
I mean, that was really interesting. So I've always thought about wanting to start like a data and analytics podcast, and I didn't know where to start. So now I know.
Yeah.
But just a couple of things that kind of caught me from what you were saying. You said the important thing at the start is understanding the competition and understanding your audience.
Yeah.
That's obviously really hard if it's before you started out. So how do you go about understanding that audience competition?
Really, really good question. So what I did at that time, well, actually surprised. I actually thought there was a lot of hospitality podcasts. I just Googled hospitality podcasts. And then it came up, not many. I thought that's something wrong with my search. And I went in on Apple. I just went systematic through it. And I found there's not many of them. Okay, not a proof point. And then in principle, what I did was like, I did one-to-one interview with people I was already customers of me, or I had, some customers you really build a strong relationship. You can ask them all kinds of things. And if you say, I'm thinking about launching a podcast, I really want to ask you a couple of questions about what the real pain point is. There's also a different way of finding out how you can sell more to them, I found out, because they didn't say, oh, my top priorities are these are my challenges. So the two questions I asked was, what is your top priorities as a business leader right now? And then I said, what challenges do you have in connection solving these three priorities? Yes. And that was the starting point where I found out, okay, actually their pain is they want to do the right thing, but they need the insights on how to do it. So they were doing the right thing around people, but didn't know how to run a profitable business. There was a disconnect then there. So that was how I did it in the early days. And I still believe that's the right way if it's a podcast or it's actually a product or service you want to launch, because in principle it is a service you're launching to your audience.
Yeah, I like the idea of thinking of it as a service within your business, because those are probably the top two questions I ask people when we start selling to them. I've got one more question, if I may, as well. So do you think it's better to come up with a schedule at the beginning? So when you put a podcast together, we have a schedule. Oh, this podcast will be every Tuesday at whatever time. Or is it better to kind of surprise and delight the audience and not pressurize yourself into having a schedule at the start, but release a podcast when you can?
I think again comes back to what you learn when you interview them, what they actually want and what they have capacity to. So actually I found out the length of my podcast very early on could not be more. I sometimes break that, and then I have to break it into 2 episodes because I've been having this conversation. We just fall in love in the conversation. So we need to, so there's 45 minutes and that's like the sweet spot, because these people in hospitality have no time, especially now. And they will be listening to this on the commute, I found out. So that's normally an average commute into London, let's say that, or wherever you're going, is between 35 minutes to an hour. So that was the sweet spot I found out. And then coming back to your question, should I make a schedule? Where I said, I believe you have to pace yourself and get it going and actually see the data you can use afterwards. Now you're a data analyst, you need to have consistency in the data. So I would say not to put pressure on yourself, you just do once a month or a season that's released over 3 months. So you drop one every second week, but you already done all the work. The only thing you need is to drop them. You in principle can upload it all and put timers on it. It just goes live when it has to go live. And then you can do the same with your buffer and your social media. And that's how we do it. We front load the cannon. We don't sit every week and upload everything. We try to front load. And then, of course, sometimes you running a bit behind after things. But in principle, we're trying to front load it. So I always have 4 weeks advance recording because we release every week. Right now I have, I think, 6 weeks in the bank.
Wow. So in essence, you actually you could create, I'm going to do my podcast project in March, and then that could cover you for the whole year if you can commit a couple of weeks to it. So rather than having to think about factoring in every week, you actually do it all ahead of time and then drip feed it into your platforms.
Yes, like what do you call it? I'm in this like little community of, we all have different podcasts, but he has one in sales coaching. I think twice a year he books a hotel room, invites guests in, and he does over a day 10 interviews. It must be really hard to really focus. I don't know how he does it. I couldn't do 10, but it's really demanding because you have to concentrate a lot. You'll probably feel it now as you interview.
Yes, I couldn't do 10.
and then he's bulk loaded the Canon for the rest of the year in principle. So that's how he does it.
Amazing.
I do it more on a running schedule also because it has to be relevant. There's things happening. So I had Kate Nichols on from UK Hospitalities. He's the one that's been running after the politicians that you're not doing enough. So her interview had to go live straight away. You can't, bulk interview people like that. So I do it more running consistently. Also, it fits better with my style, and I can't research. I don't have the time because you really need to do deep research. But then in principle, what he's done is like over those 2 times, he's just done said, I'm going to take 2 weeks out, get it done.
Yeah. And I suppose it again really depends on what industry,
business flow,
what your podcast is about. And I guess, so one of the things you mentioned is obviously when you set up, there was only 2 in hospitality. There's now 10 or so.
I would say about 10 in the UK, but probably more. Yeah.
And, do you think that somebody who is considering, launching their podcast needs to look at how many should be put off if there's, 50 or 100 in their chosen area? So, for example, I do sales and marketing. If I look and there's...
Oh, probably many,
Yeah, there will be a lot of them, I'm sure. Should that put me off, or should I still just go for it as long as I've got my why?
You got your why and understand the niche you're talking to.
Okay.
I think, again, niche becomes, I think everybody talks about niche today, but I really understand the niche you're talking to and the problem you're solving, that then you should still go because because your angle and view is different from anyone else, and you bring something else. There's people that you love Stephen Bartlett. Also people that said, I don't want to listen to Stephen Bartlett. I want to listen to How I Built This or Master of Scale because I just think it's better. So again, there's an audience, I think, for everything. But again, they have to feel that it's your why, being authentic in a way. I'm not super fan of that word, but it's a word everybody understands, that they can really feel that you are really passionate about that and you want to see this, whatever transformation that your promise is that your podcast should be part of facilitating, I think then you should still go for it.
I love that. Yeah. I think, you're absolutely true. And it's a lovely avenue to explore with people. One thing, we did have a question beforehand, which was if you are a bit more of an introvert or maybe not somebody who likes to see themselves in front of the camera or behind it or as far away from it as possible, can you still do it? And what are your advice for people who feel like maybe they might fall into those categories?
I think if you're an introvert, you have like an advantage that's very big because you're very good at listening.
I like it.
Being the host and interviewer, your most important job is to listen. So I have not been there. I've been talking way too much today. But again, and it's really difficult when you're passionate about something. You want to jump in and spin off. And I do that sometimes with some guests. But I think that's really a power of being introvert. And I think also there's like, it doesn't have to be with video. I know there's a lot of video podcasting going on. Stephen Bartlett is like, it's a big show that's put on there and it's a very big production in principle. But you can just do it audio. So in principle, we are still only releasing audio because it just takes the complexity out of it.
Amazing. And it's still delivering.
But you have to be, get used to your own voice, which always, for everyone, is quite hard. And I still cringe when I listen to myself, and it's just part of it, and just get over it. And because other people don't think about that, what's that accent?
Do you listen back a lot? Or?
I listen to all episodes again.
Wow.
because again, I need to check the quality because it's a reflection of the guest and my brand. And sometimes we can't fix it better than we can. We have actually cancelled some interviews sometimes and redone it because there was something with the tech that didn't work, and then just have to redo them. It will happen, but that's also why it's important to have bulk. But again, I think for introverts there's actually a big advantage because they are much better at listening. I feel introverts than extroverts are.
So that's great. So for all you introverts, go out there, get yourself recording. I mean, it's a wonderful point though. I totally agree. The listening element of a podcast is obviously so essential.
Yeah.
One other thing that you slightly touched on was obviously you've got this exciting new brand, Pulse Kitchen.
Yeah.
And having the existing podcast, did that help with like elevating Pulse Kitchen, or have you kept the two very separate?
They have actually been they lived separate entity, but actually over time they wooed together a bit, both commercially and because one of our core routes to market is food service, and these are the people I'm interviewing. So therefore, of course, there's I learn more about our core customers' pain points, and we get introductions to things we wouldn't get if it was not because the podcast didn't exist. And the network I built through that. And then, of course, there's also the element, actually, it's been, we used it to draw in investment into the business because actually people I either talked with said, oh, what is that thing you're doing over there? Can I hear a bit more about that? And then they said they wanted to invest. I'm quite sure it's because either they got a great experience on the podcast or they heard other people talking positive about the podcast. So there's definitely some leverage to do to, as one founder has a profile in some kind of way, or key person of influence, as we call it in marketing. There's no doubt about that helps, and it actually, but it goes both ways. It balances both ways in a way. Yeah.
So it really is just an extra string to your bow, and something which you seem to really enjoy.
Yeah, I love it. Like I'm obsessed about it now, and it's a bit like it's also a part of how I become better. It's a bit like my place to, when you run your own business, you often don't get much learning and development as when you were in the big corporate world where there's lots put in place for you, and that's in principle become like where I learn which books to read, what courses to go on, because there's these people you have conversation with them before or after or during the podcast where they recommend you stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of, like we said at the beginning, one of the key things for me in a podcast is learning and growing.
Yeah.
And I actually find now when I'm driving into work or whatever, I'll listen to a podcast over music. So I do think that it allows you to feed your brain in a more passive, enjoyable way.
Yeah.
Because obviously I tend to fall asleep when I read a book. So have we got any other questions from the audience? Oh, fabulous.
No, I've got some.
Oh, I've got multiple questions. Take it away.
So I think one of the things that's really cool about podcasts is that it's kind of this merging of, like, you can call it like creative and like, sort of like the creative side of stuff where you've got something that you're passionate about and, it's something that's really, really, really great to do. But then also balanced with sort of more technical where, like you say, you like do your research and, the actual technical aspect of the recording. In your experience, as you've kind of got further into your journey with it, which side now where you are do you think you enjoy more?
The interview. Being with the guests and going deep with them. And actually also being brave enough to go a layer deeper without people actually understand what's going on in that leader's mind. So one of the themes right now is how do you make hard decision or tough decision as a leader? Because I think leaders have so much pressure on them and have to make so many tough decisions right now. So again, that's where I enjoy it, because that's actually where I can take things and go and implement myself. And I think I've now outsourced all the other bits I need to. And I still involved if I need to. I understand what to do technical, but I really enjoy that bit because again, every great interview that's finished, that we actually just makes that vision about improving things a little bit better. So that's what I'm obsessed about, is doing great interviews. Other people really like that they can see technical, it's getting more smooth and so on. So again, you have to hold on to what really drives you. And if you're doing it within a company or within a team, it's about finding what people really enjoy. Like in any kind of work.
Absolutely.
Where's the potential and where we're going to be really good at? So yeah.
Is that what you think you would have expected when you were starting out, or did it surprise you?
It's surprising because I didn't enjoy it in the beginning. I was quite like intimidated, even though if I had to, you put me into a room in a sales conversation, it would be very well. But suddenly it was like, it was looked differently, the quality of my questions in a way.
Yeah.
So actually training and becoming good at asking questions is actually quite a hard thing. And I don't think I'm there yet. But again, that's probably also what I like, testing different questions and see the effect of them.
Yeah. It was a new skill, I suppose, for you. So, and on that related note, like, was there any other new skills that you learned throughout the process that really surprised you or that you really enjoyed?
I found out how hard it is to listen. We talked about it before, like how hard it's actually to just sit still and wait.
Yeah.
And don't focusing on your next question, but actually being there with the guests, really trying to understand what they're saying. So you can relay that in the best possible way. I'll take that part of the conversation on. So listening is a very difficult skill we all struggle with, I think.
Yeah. Practice and presence then.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Active listening.
Active listening,
I work with clients on. It's very challenging, but very useful.
Yeah. Amazing. Just some more questions as well, Chris?
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent.
Wow.
There you go.
No, you're not getting away just yet.
Sorry,
Grab some water.
No, thank you. Agree with Helen and Jeremy. It suddenly makes this all seem like a doable thing, which is an amazing thing in itself to do. 3 questions. One, you talked about not focusing on the questions beforehand, but the vision of the podcast and communicating that to the person that was coming on. Do you have an individual vision for each one, or do you mean to communicate your overall vision of the podcast to the person coming on?
It's an individual vision for that conversation. So what is that we want to achieve? What kind of small transformation do we want to leave with the audience? And then, of course, I've done some Googling, checking out the person, think, okay, that'll probably be this. Or in our pre-interview, we actually talk about what are the things that you really want to. We, of course, want your voice to be heard, but also what problem are we solving from an audience point of view.
Thank you. Second question, you've talked a little bit around metrics and all specific numbers related to number of listeners, but not looking at that. A sweet spot for the number of editions, timing, length of the podcast. Are there any other measures of success, either in terms of output or what you're putting in, that you think, if nothing else, nail that bit?
I don't look at much at it anymore, but it was a time where I found out our drop-off rate was quite early in the conversation, and it was something how we structured the interview. There was not, I think there's not, we changed the structure of there's some standard interview question and we built around that structure. So I think the drop-off time, you can look at many platforms. So ours now plus 70% in general, and that's a great number, but we were down at 40 at some point. It means that they didn't even get halfway down, no out. So if you want to put a mid-roll in and sell that as a part of your sponsorship, that's not good because they never get to it, and then your sponsor will not get value. But also it's not good for you because in principle they don't feel really, and that's by hand-holding them actually to the first bit and actually make it really interesting. And that's actually often diving into people's why and their story. People want to hear that, and then you become more granular as you go in a way. And then also in the intros, where how we fixed that matrix was in the intro, we actually gave people very clarity about. So we did all the intros before the interviews before. Now I do them after, because then I can actually set the scene so I can keep people interested all the way to the end. Oh, I want to hear that. Well, and I don't say when it comes. So sometimes I say in the end, so-and-so will give you super advice on blah, 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 blah. And then people stay on. So yeah, so drop-off rate, I think it's a very important metric, especially in the early days, to find out, are we actually doing the right format? Yeah.
And when you look at the drop-off rate, don't start thinking about the length of the podcast. Think, how do I get someone to the end of that?
Yeah, the value, back to value again, and structure of your questions.
And my final question, and it's a bit of reflection as well. You were talking about the strategy piece, and the thing that you've learned is that perhaps you should have sat in the strategy part of it a little bit longer.
Yeah.
I guess playing devil's advocate, it has worked for you to have started from the bottom up. And I think thinking about Silicon Brighton, it was an idea that's, you know, started as an event. Meetup organisers started approaching us. It has snowballed as a lot of startups and ideas do. And there's a lot around subconscious planning as well as consciously putting a strategy together. Do you think that matters? Or do you think sometimes you can actually just let something snowball as a small idea, and that works as well?
I think if you were just doing a podcast and not connecting it with your business, I think it's two different things. If I were just launching the podcast, I would probably, but like any other entrepreneurial project, you need to, you know, learn, fail, the lean startup model in principle. And you do that, some of that still. Also, what's really important, I don't say create a long strategy session, but actually find out how you really connect it with your brand and your why, because you already have something and you don't want to dilute that. You actually want to explode that and get most out of this initiative, because you're going to be spending 3 to 6 months even trying it out. So in that time you don't get back, you know, that's just lost time. So I think that's why. But you should also, as you go on with your podcast, I also every year I set off half a day to think about how will I take this podcast on, because you need to keep on innovating, because people aren't going to stay with you with like a product or service. Again, we talked about service before. So
Thank you.
I think that's fantastic advice. I think often people can be afraid of the process, but then also forget that every step of the process they have to keep evolving. And the industry itself, as we all know, particularly the guys at Silicon Brighton with the tech industry, is exploding, and there's some really exciting stuff going on with AI, and I know Marketing Talks is going to be doing some talks around that as well, but I'm sure that will have an impact on podcasts. And the fact that originally when podcasts came out, they were all just sound, and now they've got more video, so it's ever evolving, and I'm sure that means it keeps you on your toes.
It does.
Well, I would like to say a massive thank you, Michael. I, for one, am totally inspired, and you really have made it approachable and digestible, which I think is fantastic. So thank you so much, and wish you the best of luck with Pulse Kitchen.